Welcome back. Did you know that some genres actually expect a prologue, while readers from other genres will probably hate you for it? Get this wrong, and you may run the risk of having readers close your book before they even get to chapter 1, and nobody wants that, right? That's why today I am breaking down the exact types of prologues that work for each genre, which genres like prologues and which ones don't, as well as the two main types and then also subtypes of genres that you can write for your book. I want you to think of your prologue as an appetizer at a restaurant. Some people love and even demand an appetizer, and others don't. But if you give them something they don't want, they're probably going to be pissed at you and not leave you much of a tip, right? It's the same thing with prologues. You want to make sure that you're giving the readers what they want, no more, no less when it comes to prologues. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what kind of prologue fits your story, or whether you should skip it entirely, and if you're going to write one, what type of prologue to write. So if that's something that you are interested in and that you think will serve your writing, keep on watching. Before we hop into our discussion about prologues, if you want a ton of support in writing your novel, including the complete A to Z of how to write any story with emotional flow and resonance to hook readers, a community of like-minded authors all working together to get their stories written, access to coaching and Q&A so that you can get your questions answered, and optional Write With Me accountability sessions to make sure that you're getting your words onto the page, consider joining us inside the Legendary Fiction Forge, where you'll learn to not just write stories, but to forge legendary fiction. Also, make sure to hit subscribe so that you don't miss any future videos and writing tips. Okay, let's get on to the breakdown of prologues by genre. Okay, which genres favor prologues? In genres like romance, contemporary, or literary fiction, where immediacy and voice are paramount, prologues can feel like a barrier to meeting the characters. That reinforces the "we hate prologues" belief, okay? However, in other genres, like fantasy, thrillers, and horror, readers not only like prologues, they often expect them. So the blanket advice of readers hate prologues don't apply to these genres. So the first thing you want to do is look at the genre you're writing and ask yourself, is a prologue part of the genre expectation? If no, skip it. If yes, keep on listening. So there are really two main overarching types of prologues. There is the sneak peek flash forward prologue. This is a glimpse of the climax or high stakes moment to hook the reader. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with Nancy Drew novels, and they always did this. There would always be a first page that had just 4 or 5 paragraphs that was part of the climactic moment. It, of course, didn't give anything away. It's leading up to Nancy being found where she's hiding by the killer or something like that. And it made you want to dive into the story so that you could reach that point. So that's one type of prologue. Another type of prologue is the backstory or prequel prologue. This is what probably most people think of when they think of prologues. This is an event before chapter 1 that sets context. So this can be childhood trauma, a past crime, ancient prophecies. We're going to get into a lot of details of this type of prologue as we go along in the video. However, there are also 7 subtypes of prologues that I want to go through. First, there is the frame story prologue. This acts as a bookend. A character narrates and reflects on past events, and so we see it definitely at the beginning and the end, and sometimes we even see it in the middle or, periodically throughout the story. An example of this would be The Book Thief. The narrator is Death, and Death frames the story. This is very common in historical and literary fiction. So if you write either of those, this may be a type of prologue that you would want to consider for your book. The second type of prologue is a villain or antagonist POV prologue, right? It lets readers see the crime, the monster, or the antagonist's plan before the protagonist enters the story. It creates dramatic irony. The reader knows more than the hero knows now. And it's very common in thrillers, horror, and epic fantasy. Okay, so once again, if you write those, maybe consider this type. The number 3 is the tone or mood setter prologue. This is not about plot so much, but about atmosphere. It establishes the theme, tone, or world flavor. Example, Stephen King often does this in his horror. It's usually a brief, unsettling event that sets a mood of dread. So think of it like a movie cold open, all right? That's that type of prologue. And again, you're going to see it a lot in horror or when you're specifically trying to set a mood for your story. And then we have world building or lore prologue. This shows history, myth, prophecy, or ancient times that will ripple into the story. Tolkien did this, Wheel of Time does this, George R. Martin sometimes does it. Readers tolerate this in epic fantasy, but it's dangerous elsewhere. So really, you only want to do this with epic fantasy. Don't try to do it with any other genre. Then there's the foreshadowing or thematic prologue, a brief symbolic or thematic scene that foreshadows the core conflict or theme. In some YA or literary novels, it's a flash of the ending, a death, or an unresolved line of prologue. Purpose, it's not literal plot, but setting up the story's meaning. In terms of flash of the ending, I know that Stephanie Meyers did this in at least one of the Twilight books. I want to say it was number 3, but it's been a long time since I read those. So, again, flash of the ending, a death, an unresolved line of dialogue, and this is specifically for YA and literary, so it might not work as well in other genres. Then there's mystery or crime in action prologue. The crime itself, murder, kidnapping, heist, or possibly the victim's point of view. It's often a whodunit hook. Classic in thrillers and detective fiction. And I will say that in terms of TV, they almost always use this in serial crime kind of TV shows, things like CSI or Criminal Minds, right? They show what happens, then they have the intro, then they get into the episode, right? You can do that in books as well, and it works very well for crime and mystery. Then there's first kill or first scare prologue. This is specific to horror. Some, often not the main character, but someone dies or encounters the monster or curse first. Think of the opening kill in Jaws or Scream. This sets the tone and the threat before the protagonist actually appears. All right, so those are the 7 types, and now we're going to go into, one more time, prologue types by genre, just to reinforce everything. So the sneak peek or flash forward, the genres that do this really well are thrillers, romantic suspense, and YA, especially if the YA is fantasy or paranormal. Why does this work for these genres? Because these readers love high tension and high stakes teases. They want to be promised the big payoff early on. So this is very much a matter of giving them a promise, and by reading the book, you're going to pay it off for them. This is less common in epic fantasy or historical fiction because it can feel gimmicky. The backstory or prequel, the genres that do this are historical fiction, epic or high fantasy, romance, especially historical romance. That makes sense, right? And that's because it often sets up a past trauma, a scandal, a war, or a prophecy, and readers are going to expect layered timelines for these genres. So this is going to be less common in YA contemporary, rom-com, those kinds of genres because it feels like an unnecessary delay. The frame story. Story within a story, right? This happens in literary fiction, historical fiction, and epic sagas most often. It works well when the narrative is reflective, cyclical, or meant to feel like a tale being told. So like I just said, story within a story. The Princess Bride is a really good example of this. Then there's the villain or antagonist POV that we talked about. This is common in thrillers, crime fiction, horror, and sometimes epic fantasy. It creates suspense and dramatic irony and lets us see the threat before the hero does. It's very rare in romance, YA contemporary, or literary fiction because it feels off genre. And when you think about that, that really makes sense, right? If you're doing a villain, in romance, you have antagonists, but you don't have evil villains quite as often. So you can see why this wouldn't work quite as well for that genre. Then there's the tone or the mood center. Remember we talked about Stephen King setting the tone of dread. So the genres that are going to do this is horror, literary fiction, or gothic. Love me some gothic. These genres thrive on atmosphere. So any genre that thrives on atmosphere, or if your book in particular thrives on atmosphere, this will work for you. Readers are primed for mood, but not immediate character connection, okay? Example, Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House opens with a mood-heavy prologue. All right, so check that out if you want to see this in action. Then there's the world-building lore prologue. This works in epic fantasy and sci-fi, especially space opera and dystopian. It establishes ancient history, prophecy, or galactic politics. So much fun. Readers in these genres are patient with the setup because they expect that for their genre, right? Epic fantasy and sci-fi tend to be a little bit longer because there's so much world building in them, and readers expect that, so they are okay with this kind of prologue. But it's going to be rare in thrillers, romance, or YA contemporary because it killed the momentum. You see how you've really got to take into account your genre here? For the foreshadowing or thematic prologue, we're going to want to see that in YA, fantasy or contemporary, literary fiction, and speculative fiction. Why? Because a flash of theme or story can intrigue readers who value meaning as much as plot. Example, many YA novels open with a mysterious line from the end of the story. So once again, you can see why this wouldn't work as much for more commercially driven fiction, because in those, the reader isn't as concerned with the meaning as they are with the plot. It's kind of the opposite of this, and that's why this kind wouldn't work for many of those genres. Crime and action. Obviously, mystery, crime thrillers, and police procedurals. Readers expect to see the crime right away, even if the detective isn't on scene yet. And that is so heavily built into the format of these kinds of stories. That's why this works. It's going to be very rare in fantasy or romance unless it's cross-genre. First kill, first scare, which is horror specific. Obviously, we're going to see this in horror and paranormal thrillers. And it's because it's a trope, the cold open kill that establishes danger before the protagonist knows it exists. But it's not going to be found in pretty much any other genre unless you are blending it like a cross-genre thing with horror. So let's recap here a little bit. Genre-specific prologues. You're going to see world building and lore in fantasy and sci-fi. Crime and action are going to go into thrillers and crime. First kill is horror. The story frame or frame story, literary historical sagas. And then there's cross-genre prologues, such as sneak peek and backstory, show up everywhere, but are executed differently depending on genre tone. The villain POV crosses thriller, fantasy, and horror, but doesn't work in romance and contemporary. Foreshadowing thematic is most flexible, but tends to skew YA and literary. Okay? I hope this breakdown of prologues by genre has been valuable to you. I have created a handout with all of this information so that you have a reference for it, and you just need to click the link in the caption in order to get it. Before you go, once again, make sure and click subscribe. Before you go, once again, make sure and smash the subscribe button so you don't miss any future writing tips. For now, get out there and write those stories that only you can tell. Your ideal readers are scrolling Amazon searching for them even now. So get going. Until next time, happy writing.